On this episode, we'll discuss avoiding the most common HR mistakes in ministry. Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast, the show that is dedicated to inspiring leaders and empowering healthy churches. We do that through conversations, interviews, and stories, all as we're exploring what is happening in ministry today and how pastors and leaders can navigate what lies ahead. I am Kendall Connor, excited to be co-hosting today with Jessica Moore. Hey, how are you, Jess?
Hey, Kendall. Doing good.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. I mean, here, I don't know how it is where you're located, but here in North Carolina, the weather is starting to get a little bit warmer. Come on,
Yes.
Super exciting. You can go outside. The time recently changed, right? We got a little bit more daylight in the evenings.
There's daffodils and there's green grass. So that's all my brain needs to come back to life.
Come back to life, right?
Makes such a big difference. Yes. And I grew up in Florida. So, when I first moved here 10 years ago, I was like, oh, winter's so cute. The holidays are wonderful. And then now I've been here for 15 years. I'm like, after the holidays, let's just go back to green. Let's go back. Let's get over it. Yes. Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. I don't know about you, but I love getting out and working in the yard and, tending to the grass and, getting those flowers and all just right. So this is my season we're stepping into here.
That's awesome.
Well, we've got a great episode planned today. It's going to be a really good one. We get to kind of dive into the subject of human resources, HR, when that comes to ministry. And I like that we get a chance to talk about this today because that isn't something that I feel like is always at the forefront of church leaders' minds, right?
Right. Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And I don't want to make a generalization, and our guest will kind of maybe speak light into this, but also I feel like those creative brains, the vision casters, they're not always wired to think about that, So this is going to be a really helpful conversation, I'm sure.
I think so too. And it's a big part of church ops. And we've got a great special guest, Justin Romine, that's going to come, and we're going to have a conversation with him to give a little bit of clarity to the subject and avoiding some of the kind of pitfalls that are just so important that we avoid. And so let me tell you a little bit about him. If you haven't had a chance to connect with Justin before, he serves as the managing partner and CEO over at HR Ministry Solutions. And I'll tell you more about that in just a second. But a little background on him is he spent 20 plus years both as a pastor and on the other side of it, an executive in the corporate ranks among Fortune 500 companies, which is a really unique combination. He is totally passionate about the health of the church and really coaching people towards their heart and their purpose. And he just brings so much heart to what he does. And so I know that it's going to be a great conversation. He also has been on the podcast before. And so you get a little extra time, go back and listen to some of a previous episode where he's been able to join us. He currently resides in Idaho with his wife and his 2 children. And while we're talking about HR Ministry Solutions, I just think something that is totally cool about it, Jess, is that this is a nonprofit, a 501c3, and they are working to help to really simplify HR for churches and other ministries. And they've got a team of experts that are really out there helping ministries all over the place. An amazing organization. So without further ado, I'm ready to jump into this conversation. I want to just welcome to the show, Justin. Hey, how are you, Justin?
It's doing well. It's great to see the two of you and excited about the time we get to spend together today. So.
It's going to be good. I know that we got a chance to talk a little bit before and get a little bit of an introduction before we're recording. And we talked about kind of why HR is a big deal for churches, even though I feel like, as Jess and I just said, it isn't something I feel like is always at the forefront of everybody's mind. We're going to jump into all of that. But first, something we always like to do to kick things off is before we, you got we got the public bio, right? Mm-hmm. But really quickly, can you tell us a little bit more about you? What's something that doesn't make that public bio that all your family and friends would know about you?
Yeah, something that doesn't make the public bio, and usually that has to do with where I'm spending my time. So I think when don't have the privilege of being in the ministry realm, I mean, we're always in the ministry realm, but one of the things that I love being able to do is coach my son's travel baseball team. So I get to be one of the coaches. I love baseball. I'm a huge baseball fan and spend a lot of time playing myself. So it's fun to be able to pass on that legacy and that passion to kids and see them not only grow up to be, wonderful baseball players, but to see them become, excellent young men who are going to affect the community of change and really be able to show them Jesus in a practical way. Yes. Sometimes without talking about Jesus, but just showing them that sort of leadership and everything else. So I love doing that. I'm a coach at heart, so it kind of tends to come out everywhere. So
I love that. And I've got 3 boys myself, and they just kicked off baseball for the season, right? We were out of practice last night. And I have nothing but respect for the coaches. That's one thing that I do not try to take on myself, but I have nothing but respect for those of you who go out there and make that happen. I do have to know though, if you're a baseball fan, like what MLB team are you pulling for?
Yeah, so I am a lifelong San Diego Padre fan and Anaheim Angels fan. So that is where I spend most of my life. And I have a National League team and an American League team. And I would argue that they're the holiest teams in baseball when you think about it. So you got the Pastors and then God's Warriors out there. So unfortunately, they don't always look like that out on the field. So
yeah, I have one question about baseball. How old is your son?
Yeah, so he's 13 right now.
Okay, because that matters if you're coaching. Yeah, I mean, I got to know. My son's 13 also, and I think coaching a team of 13-year-old boys is a fun challenge.
It is. It's a great way of putting
Middle schoolers. Yeah,
they're 8th grade and 9th graders, and it is a very interesting challenge to see what these kids have to deal with, and just to be able to be a mentor and a coach to these kids, and just it's been a lot of fun to just be there for them. But yes, a lot of interesting things are brought up and discussed and are said. I get to learn all of the slang amongst this generation, which is very confusing, and so they help me be a little bit younger too. So I'm very appreciative of that.
Love it.
That's very cool. I can't let this segment go by without saying that I'm a diehard Baltimore Orioles fan. I just got to get that in there to make sure that that's on record somewhere with this podcast. Absolutely. I haven't had the opportunity to share that little snippet about me before.
Well, Kendall, this is our moment to make our teams known. So, Jessica, you're the only one who hasn't said it. You might as well throw in there if you have a team of choice.
Yes, I love it. I'm a fan of yours, Justin, already, just because we got to talk about this. So
yeah, I'm feeling mutual.
Well, tell us a little bit about your story. I know that we talked about you spent years as a pastor, and I just would love, maybe that's the best place to start out this conversation.
Yeah, I think kind of the cliff notes is I just have been very fortunate to have a lot of other people seeing me what I didn't see originally, and then see God grow that over time. Didn't think I would be in ministry. Thought I was going to be in more of the business world, which I've had the privilege of spending time in. But I had a lot of people kind of speak into my life and just say, God has a call on your life to help point other people to Jesus. And through a lot of those amazing voices in my life, I've had a lot of opportunities to serve in a variety of different churches and ministries. From national ministries to Christian schools to churches, both big and small. And I started doing youth ministry, and that was an amazing experience, being able to see God do amazing things. And during COVID, got to come out of a corporate environment. And I think a lot of people were asking, what do I really want to do? Am I doing what I want to do? And I was in the corporate realm, and COVID was hard for everybody, and came out and said, I really miss doing the ministry work that I've done in the past. So was able to, I had helped HR Ministry Solutions since its inception, and came online, and here we are many years later, serving churches and ministries all over the country and pretty much every state now, and being able to help them in a lot of different ways that I know we'll get into talking about.
No, that's
Okay.
always good. And one of my favorite parts of being able to do this podcast is hearing the stories of folks and how kind of God has brought together the different pieces of life to put them where they are now. Uh, you know, I feel like human resources, HR, that's not really something that they spend a lot of time on during seminary or during ministry training and things like that. Kind of when did you realize just how important HR is for churches?
That's a really great question. I think, well, the first part of it is, seminaries don't really do this. I mean, when I went through Bible college and my seminary coursework and went to a great university, they didn't teach this stuff. And as I have the opportunity to go around to different conferences and speak along with our team, we hear the same thing, is that it may be a part of a church administration course and it might be one class within that course. Well, that doesn't work. And one of the mandates that we feel like we have is to really help churches understand that HR is the backbone to a healthy culture that's directly tied to biblical discipleship and stewardship. Now, I got to learn that through kind of the school of hard knocks and really, working in different churches and seeing how when those things are done well, it eliminates things like burnout and it really helps care for people well. One of the things that, I talk to churches about is make sure that you're not treating your people like a consumable item, that they're not just something that can be consumed and thrown out, but they're a disciple that needs to be grown and helped and invested in. And so that's really through my ministry experience, I got to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of what happens when people are treated well and when people aren't treated well, and really kind of found over time through my own experience how there was a big gap in the ministry marketplace. And as certain things from a policy and government, both federal, state, and even local now have changed and made things more bureaucratic and difficult, compliance has become such a huge challenge for churches everywhere, especially in what we call high change states. Like, California is the king of challenges for HR, but you've got Oregon, Washington, Colorado, New York, and a few others that are following suit in that direction, where the compliance level is higher than other states that still have challenges, but maybe not as many flaming hoops that they have to jump through, if you will. Yeah. So a lot of practical experience led to really the statement that I had mentioned about really realizing biblically how it's connected to biblical discipleship and stewardship. And churches talk about culture frequently, but I think that this is a missing point that is a blind spot for many churches. And that's why we see burnout continuing to be an issue in the church. We saw an exodus of pastors after COVID because they were like, maybe I'll retire a little bit early. This has been a tough season and hand it over to the next generation, which we're having challenges finding now. So, hopefully that answers that question well.
It does. In fact, the last episode we recorded was about rest and the importance of it. And I think this goes hand in hand with that, where at the end of the day, without the law in place, without the rules in place, the legality of it, it's easy to overlook it, right? It's easy to just for yourself, say, well, I don't have to take these days. I don't, but when you add kind of the legal piece to it and like the official piece to it, then people need to implement that. And to your point, if you do that well, it brings life into your organization. Those rules are just like scripture, those rules are there for your protection, right? And so understanding the benefit of them is critical. Obviously, time off is not the only thing that HR.
But it's a good example, Jessica, your point.
Yeah. And I mean, I know just for work, right? So having the time off is a gift. And depending on the person, some people won't take time off. And so having that, making sure that HR circles back and says, no, you actually have to take this time off. I think it's good. I think it's very helpful.
Well, and it's also a way too. We are able to communicate how much we value our team by showing them how much we care about their time.
Yeah.
Because the newer generations that are coming up aren't as much defined vocationally with what they do. It's actually what they do outside of work, oftentimes, that they're more defined by. So, and it spans, and that's a whole discussion about generations, which I enjoy talking about. But
Yeah.
one of the interesting things about it is that churches are missing the opportunity to talk about how much they care about their people, because there's compliance. We talk about compliance and best practice a lot. Yes, compliance is important, what you're required to do legally, but the best practice of understanding how to care for your people well is really important, and it must be done intentionally. Because if you don't give people expectations, clear expectations, guess what? They make their own, and they're always different from one another. And that causes challenges.
That's good.
We talk about how sometimes you don't see HR as a priority in ministry. How can churches shift their mindset on that? What areas are we talking about when we do talk about HR?
Man, that was a loaded question, Kendall, and a good one at that. There's a lot of areas in regards to HR. At the end of the day, it's how you are required to care for your people. So that should be at the heart of any church. At the end of the day, something really important is that I think that there is a very dangerous assumption in the church, in the big C church. And that is, because we are called to discipleship, it means that we're great at it. I disagree. A calling doesn't mean that you're effective in discipleship. It just means that you're called to do it. In my experience, discipleship never happens on accident, and it always happens on purpose. And what we find is that there is not enough intentionality on how you disciple your staff, because often what we find in the big C church is there can be too much of a focus on the congregation, not on the people that God has put within that immediate circle of leadership to care for those people. I think it's one of the reasons why we have challenges in some areas in regards to legacy and handing things over from one generation to the next. So I think that's a challenge that the church really the big C church has to unlock. So I think at the end of the day, and I know we'll get into some details, Kendall, is at the end of the day, HR is how do you care for your people? And what are the things that you need to do to make sure that you're holistically caring for your people, whether that's through government regulation, whether that's through how you value them as a disciple. And you'll see my pastoral heart come out a lot in this, because I think that there's a way to blend discipleship and the compliance issues together to be able to help people know where they are within your ministry organization, your church or your ministry, because they want to know how they're being successful in their calling. They want to know what their vocational track is going to look like as they serve Jesus and point other people to him. So these are all things that we find as when we have a focus, and we've all heard the phrase, if you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. And since this isn't something that's taught in a lot of seminaries, there isn't training that has gone into this. And a lot of times we take more of a visionary outlook on leadership, which is great. Love that. But we aren't as intent on understanding the implications of good ministry managers and how to carry that out in individual growth.
Yeah. So this next question actually, I think, piggybacks perfectly into this, speaking about practical resources. So love the idea. How do we implement it? And so things like employee handbooks or staff lifestyle agreements, those are some of the key compliance tools that are used. And then can you help us unpack kind of what those are, why they're essential, and then what risk churches face without them?
Yeah, these are two documents that are very critical. So you mentioned a staff handbook. That is a cornerstone document of any church or ministry organization, right alongside of your church bylaws and constitution and your statement of faith. If you don't have a way to communicate, and this, it doesn't matter if you have a church of 2 staff or 200 staff, you need to have a way to be able to communicate policies as well. So an interesting fact about handbooks is they are not legally required. But what is legally required is that you communicate certain policies federally and statewide. The reality is that pretty much everyone uses a handbook to do that. Right. So it's very important from a legal standpoint, because if you do go through anything difficult as a church with your staffing, with your employees, the first thing when you go into any sort of disagreement is, especially when you get into more of the legal side of things, is they'll ask for your handbook. And the only thing worse than not having a handbook is not having one that has been updated or correct. And we see this all of the time. It sits on the shelf and people only look at it when they're hired or when some major life incident has happened to them. And we find that if churches communicate the things that their employees want to hear out of the handbook, for instance, we have a rollout guide where we talk about major topics month over month, and we give those, where like people want to know their vacation benefit. People want to know what happens if they get sick. People want to know if there's a sabbatical benefit and how they take advantage of it. So being able to help your people not burn out and let them know about the tools that you've provided for them because you care about them and you want to see them grow. So a handbook is a cornerstone document. Really important to have one. And it's also important to do it right. Don't borrow it from another church. Don't go off a template, because it's really important to customize. There's a lot of variables and you can easily get it wrong. And we do more custom staff handbooks than almost any other service quantitatively for that reason alone. So if anyone's needed help, that's definitely a place where we can. Now, staff lifestyle agreement, you talked about this, and I'll try to make this brief, Jessica, is a staff lifestyle agreement is known as a couple different things, like a staff covenant or a commitment to community, the community of the church. And this is for staff members. And it ties your statement of faith to behavioral outcomes. And really what it talks about is what verses are in alignment. A lot of churches assume, oh, we're a church, so of course that's assumed that we do faith-based things and we're protected. Well, no, you need to state them because quite honestly, there's different denominations and there's different areas of belief. A great example of something that's found on a staff lifestyle agreement is to be pure in your marriage or in your singleness, and then verses to support that. Verses supporting it is really, really important. Yeah. And I've got a lot of stories how this is not only, there's two values of a staff lifestyle agreement. One is and we look at it primarily as a discipleship tool. If you're having the conversation of behavioral outcomes and saying, hey, everyone from the lead pastor to the amazing person who's helping our kids, 8 hours a week, it all has to abide in certain behavioral outcomes so that the leadership bar is where God has called us to as a church. Well, that's going to bring about conversations that are more helpful for the culture of the organization so that the pitfalls and the secret sin doesn't creep in. So we see it as a discipleship tool first. And then secondly, we see it as a huge risk mitigation tool. When things do go astray, you can say, hey, this is what we all are holding to. This is actually something you've signed off on. And it's also just a top tip for your audience. It's important that these two items are separate. Sometimes these are put together into one document and the staff lifestyle agreement gets lost. A staff lifestyle agreement is also great to review during your employee evaluations.
That's a great point, because a handbook is really like, here's the rules, follow them. An agreement is, I see the rules and I'm committing to upholding these particular things. Also, just want to point out that these are things that we have at Ministry Brands. Like, we have an employee handbook and we have lifestyle agreements loosely, just more so for compliance with the type of, we work with software, there's sensitivity, blah, 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 blah. So all of that, no one would feel uncomfortable coming into interview 1 or interview 2 saying, what can I expect from the, compliance standpoint? What can I expect from the employee handbooks? I mean, it wouldn't be an uncomfortable conversation in any other organization. I wouldn't say any, but most organizations, corporate specific. So a church, I mean, if we're having this conversation, it means that it's not happening. It's not as comfortable to have those conversations in a church interview or employment interview.
Well, and Jessica, it's a great point. Real quickly, just jumping in, Kendall, is that we actually recommend when you're going over interviews and you're talking really, especially about, what are your beliefs, theologically, is your philosophy of ministry the same, is to say, hey, this is our staff lifestyle agreement. where
Right.
we have our behavioral outcomes tied to our theology, so we can live out what we believe in real time, because
Right.
oftentimes that can be a real big challenge. So,
Well,
That's
and
good.
I just think it's important. So, our main topic of today of avoiding those common HR mistakes, things that I'm hearing you say, Justin, and share is, an employee handbook, having a handbook for anyone who's on your staff is critical. That's like day one stuff, right? And there's going to be a lot of people who are listening to this and they may be saying, man, this is something that our church doesn't have. And so I love that we're having this conversation. And then, talking about having a separate document that is available that basically it's an agreement. It's a signed agreement, right? That points out all of those things. And, I'm just thinking back to getting people involved in church before. This is not something that's not only can be a good thing for your staff, but also any leaders. So I think about coming from a church plant role. There's so many people who are involved at a high level who are not paid, right? And especially in a smaller church setting. This is something that you want to take your leaders through, right? But not just the ones that are on the payroll. But is that something that you deal with?
yeah, it's something that you want to have infused in your culture. If this is, you wouldn't have a statement of faith and then never reference it as a church. So why do we not have a handbook, or have a handbook that we leave on a shelf and we never go back to, when it's one of the biggest tools that sets the policy understanding for our people on how to be successful? It allows them to understand a general kind of sandbox, as I like to say, that everyone gets to play in together. It sets expectations from a very high level. And what it does is it allows you, since the higher line expectations have been set, to go in and give specific expectations when it comes to things like job descriptions and departmental expectations when you get into larger environments. So if you don't set that standard, if you don't put that boundary down and revisit it as a part of your culture and infuse it in the things that you do in a practical way for your people, then all of a sudden there's no sandbox that people get to play in together.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, when you try to set expectations, it becomes a foreign idea when you start talking about things like job descriptions and evaluations of behavior. All these, the reality is that if people meet expectations, they're usually a lot happier. But where they get frustrated is when expectations aren't met, especially when they don't know what they are.
Right.
So, and that's one of the big challenges that we find with managers in general, ministry managers, is oftentimes people leave their job, and this is corporate, nonprofit, it's the same. One of the biggest reasons people leave their job is because of their manager. And oftentimes it's tied directly to expectations.
Yep.
Wow.
That makes sense. So speaking of expectations, pay, let's talk about it for a minute. Obviously, it's kind of hard to classify church roles and jobs, or maybe it's not. I don't know. But if we're not being taught as pastors or leaders how to do that, then I would imagine it's tricky. And so how do you talk? Let's talk about classifying and paying church employees, and what's some common mistakes that are made there.
Well, we could spend a whole time on that alone. So just a whole conversation about that.
Because everyone cares about that, right? Like that, it's a big deal. If you're a staff member, come on, like you want to make sure that you're going to have groceries on your table.
You want to make sure that you get paid. We have a lot of webinars. One of the big things that we do that I love is we do a lot of education, because it's really needed in this space. We have a lot of education about this, but I'll speak a little bit more generally on this. One of the things overarching, and then I'll get into some of the details, is that we find that churches and ministries go, oh, we're a faith-based 501c3. They get overly creative, right? We've seen a lot of amazing things that are absolutely wrong. From a retirement standpoint, where churches are buying pastors' homes, like doing things that you just can't do. We find that classifications are often incorrect, exempt versus non-exempt. We find that ministerial exceptions are oftentimes not taken advantage of enough or misunderstood. Especially when it comes to ministers, there's a lot of confusion around certain areas, because you have a minister according to tax purposes, and then you have a minister. So that's the first part. And then you have the other areas where you're looking at ministerial exception. So those are two different things, and they're overseen by two different government agencies. So we often see that there is challenges there. We see pay being one of the biggest things for non-pastoral employees is that we see that the church completely misuses 1099 status. And the 1099 laws have gotten much more strict. And that was kind of a way to put employees that don't really fit the mold of part-time and full-time. The problem is that most of the time churches are using this, and I'm speaking in some generalities, their 1099 employees should not be 1099 employees because they don't meet the criteria of a 1099 employee. So those are just some of the pitfalls that we see, and we help a lot of churches with that by really asking quite a few different questions to be able to identify some of these pitfalls and give them a little bit of clarity. We do a lot of audits around compensation to make sure that not only people are being paid correctly, but they're also being paid their market value as well. So we see that there's a lot of challenges in this area because people often don't know, and they with a really wonderful heart are trying to care for their people, but oftentimes they put themselves in harm's way. And here's where I'll kind of land the plane, is that if anyone calls in the Department of Labor or any other agencies that oversee some of these areas, once they come in and they get a report, an anonymous report or a report from an employee, maybe disgruntled, maybe not, saying, you know what, I didn't really get paid correctly or didn't get paid well. Once they investigate that and get in, they don't just look at that one thing. They look at everything, which means that they're now looking at your I-9s. They're looking at a variety of different things. They're looking at anything that's attached to your EIN number and 501c3. So if you're a church with a school, they're probably not going to just look at the church and it's at their discretion. They may look at the school as well. So that's just an example. So it's really important to invest in your HR systems and processes because it is going to most likely save you a lot of money in the future. And I have far too many stories about this because many churches will say, oh, well, we don't think that's, I've literally had churches say, we don't think that's going to happen to us. So, that may be true. That may be true. But here's my question for those pastors and leaders is, would you feel comfortable standing in front of your staff and telling them that? And then would you feel comfortable standing in front of your congregation and letting them know that too? And this is where the biblical stewardship role of HR is so critical and important.
That's what keeps coming to my mind is HR obviously stands for human resources, and how often I feel like because of budget and finances and you have to evaluate your resources. We're spending way too much in paper towels. Let's reevaluate. Where can we switch to Costco? Can we, whatever, or we're, you're being a good steward of your finances and you're in direct correlation to your non-human resources, right? To see where you can either save money or increase quality or whatever else. Your humans should be your number one priority when it comes to your resources. So I think it's something that is overlooked, but my goodness, how obvious that you should be spending time on meeting the needs of your human resources.
Absolutely. And for us, we do look, HR is the term, but we look at it at the end of the day is these are the people that God has put in your care to lead and to point them to Jesus as they point other people to Jesus. So it's so critical that there is much more. We should be doing better. We should be holistically leading people towards a better understanding of what it means to lead. When the corporate world is doing sometimes, and there's a different functionality too between the two, but oftentimes doing a better job, that's problematic. And here's one thing that I'll point out is HR in the corporate world is much different than it is in faith-based nonprofit world. We find that there's about a 40% difference between what you can and can't do between the two, and as well as the way it's delivered. We're coming from it from a different, philosophy of a ministry standpoint where the corporate world doesn't have that. So we have an opportunity that we really find missing, and we hear a lot from the different clients that we get to work with all across the country who say, when we started to implement this, we were able to start seeing a shift in our culture because we brought some structure to where it needed to go.
It's so good.
If you were to just to to kind of recap, and maybe even if there's any of these that you haven't been able to cover really quickly, can you just give us some bullet points of what are some of the most common HR mistakes that you see as you're working with churches?
Yeah, we've talked about a few. I think not defining who you're hiring is a huge one that we see time and time again. Paying ministers and staff incorrectly, we just talked about. I think another one that I would mention is that there's no staff coaching or evaluations. There's not a plan in place to disciple your people well. We find that if oftentimes asking the right questions diffuses a lot of the challenges that we find in ministry. I think that not having a handbook and or having an outdated one, or one that you really haven't invested strategic time in, and a staff lifestyle agreement is another one. And then lastly, something we see unfortunately too often in the church is finding ways, especially through training, on minimizing harassment issues is a big one, is a really important item that we're called to love our people. And sometimes that can come out in different ways, and people have different ways of accepting that. So helping people understand what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, that can be translated down to the volunteer level, is really, really, really critical.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, overall, I think both of you would agree with me on this, is that you get to talking through these things and it gets a little bit scary, right? Like you're thinking about your organization. You want to make sure that like you have everything together. Justin, would you, for every pastor, every ministry leader that's listening to this, and maybe they're realizing that their church may have some gaps in this thing, right?
Yeah.
In their HR. What would you say, is should be their first step? What's a way that they can improve in this area?
Yeah, it's like the first step is recognizing you have a problem, right?
That's why we're here today, right?
Yeah,
always.
I think that's the biggest challenge, is going, if this is about our people, we need to make sure that we have a plan in place, that we're not only creating, but we're revisiting. Because at the end of the day, you have to count the cost. And my heart goes out to the pastors and the ministers that are out there, because I made a lot of the same mistakes they're making when I was in ministry. And I had to learn through a lot of those things that I either saw or I encountered myself in different pastoral positions that I was in. But I think that there's 4 costs that I would point out in short. One is there is the cultural cost. We've talked about that, the impact on the team and the entire staff. Then there's the discipleship cost, which is the impact to individual employees and their experience in the church. And also what we can see too, not that it's correct, but their view of God and how that can be affected by that as well. The third that we should not overlook, and I can tell horror story after horror story. And you're right, Kendall, it's hard to balance. Like, we don't want to cause fear in people, but we do want to bring awareness. And when you bring awareness, people go, oh my gosh, I'm sitting on a powder keg if certain things happen. So there's the financial cost of what happens if we neglect certain state, and federal government regulations as well. And then really the stewardship cost is what is not just looking at like what the government says that we have to do, but what does God call us to do from a biblical stewardship standard? So when you count those 4 costs together, it brings things a little bit more into focus.
Definitely.
So when you count the costs, that would be where I would start the conversation, is realize that you have to count the cost, realize that God is calling you to be responsible for your people, because we have been given the Great Commission. And from a church leadership standpoint, there is a function to that is a little bit more systematized and that we need to honor. And when we don't do that, we set ourselves up for a lot of challenges that, I say this frequently, we love, and rightly so, talking about how many churches we get to plant. That's a big victory for churches, but we don't often talk about how many churches shut down. Right now, an interesting fact of, I think it was Barna who just released it, is that we are actually right now, we are not planning as many churches as churches are being shut down. Wow. And that's a problem. And one of the reasons churches shut down is because of the items that we've talked about today. So we don't want to see that happen. We've seen churches where go in and remedy those things. We've seen churches with federal and state fines of hundreds of thousands of dollars because, like I said, once they got in for one issue, I would much rather see that the church use that for outreach and missions and helping kids and getting the gospel out, translating the Bible in foreign. I mean, we can go down the list of those things all day rather than giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to the federal or state government. So, and it also, what it does is it causes a lack of trust between the congregation, the staff, and the leadership. And that is a lot. It's easy to lose and hard to get back.
Yeah, that's so good.
As we're kind of wrapping things up today, I know that we want to have time to go through our Fast Five that we always like to end with, but something that I think would be a great place to end is, you help a lot of different churches, right? You have been able to see just for firsthand how when you do get things right, when you do get your house in order, so to speak, when it comes to these ministries, how that can lead to good things. Could you share a success story with us about a church who's implemented some of these policies and these strong HR practices, right, and been able to see some transformation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I can go down the trail of doom and gloom, but I think I've already done that. Used enough examples saying what could happen. So I think one of the positive examples that I have is, and I have quite a few, it's so awesome because it helps us know that we're accomplishing our vision, our mission, and living by our values. But there was one church in particular that when we started, we took them through an HR audit because they were like, we don't know where we're going through a big transition. And the executive pastor didn't really have much background in HR, but he's like, I know we need help. I just don't know what. So, and what we find a lot of times, churches don't know what they don't know. And so we came in, we did an audit where we were able to identify and find what's going on. We find when we do an HR audit with the church or ministry, we find that 9 out of 10 churches have at least 2 or more major forms of noncompliance. It's a staggering statistic that we get to really experience in real time. So we went through this with them. And we had been working with them for years, and they just kept doing work with us. And they were growing as a church, and they were growing as a church, and they were having a turnover problem when we started working with them. And what they found, and they were doing employee surveys, the culture started to shift because we were advising them to care for their people and to tell them how they appreciated their people, and to put expectations and to put some really great coaching in place and to do the outworking of the things that we talked about practically and really spend the time. And I think one of the things that I hear from churches sometimes in their leadership is, oh, this takes time. And we may not have enough time. I'm like, if your people aren't the object of the majority of your time, then maybe your priorities are a little out of whack. And I would challenge them with that. So they started putting the emphasis on their staff. And what they found is the staff did amazing things and went out and served the congregation, and they exploded. And we had to keep helping them because it kept growing. And this is this one church that I'm thinking of. They also went through our HR training. They've gone through everything with us. And we're so blessed and so honored to say that they're one of many churches who has a similar testimony of what God has really done through our expertise and seeing the outworking of that with them in ministry. And we just are so humbled to be a part of that ministry and to be able to point them in the right direction. But there's a lot of different success stories that we see, but I think that's a good one generally that we've seen applied to so many churches throughout the country.
That's awesome.
That is good. And it just shows that, like, okay, you put in the work, like you can turn these things around, right? Like that you can find those good elements and being able to bring those in, and it can have a positive impact on your staff and your church as a whole. Jess, I know that you are an expert at taking us through these Fast Five. Do you want to take us through these rapid fire round before we jump forward?
Do I need to stretch for this? Am I ready?
I'm telling you, you got to get ready. You got to get ready.
So, all right.
Okay. So what is one book on this subject or similar that you would recommend to church leaders?
What am I reading right now? Oh, and actually I'm at my desk. So I have the book that I'm reading right now, and this is what I'd recommend. It's like I'm prepared for this. I'm really not. So the book actually, and I'm a huge fan of Peter Drucker. And this is a book that doesn't get enough. It's Managing the Nonprofit Organization. I actually read this book every 2 years, and I read his other book, The Effective Executive, every year, or every other year, kind of as opposites. But Managing the Nonprofit is a great book Peter Drucker is known as the father of management. In my graduate work, I spent a lot of time with his material, and it really was a big, huge change for me. If you ever want to see a good interview, Peter Drucker and Rick Warren, incredible interview on organizational management and change, just fantastic. But definitely a go-to book for me, but it's also the one I'm reading right now. So
perfect. Love that. Am I doing all of these, Kendall?
What do you think?
Sure. Okay. What's the last thing you have listened to on Spotify or Apple Music?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Last thing.
Don't be embarrassed. You can be honest.
No, it was actually hanging out, driving to baseball practice with my son, and we were listening to Josiah Queen, new worship artist. Really like him. My son loves his songs, and I've become a fan as well. So Josiah Queen, check him out if you haven't.
Yeah, we like him too at our house.
Yeah.
Okay, favorite piece of technology or software?
I would say my AirPods. I'm always on the phone or doing things like this. So they're just so convenient. They're so convenient. So AirPods, I think, would be my answer for that.
I think early on when I did a podcast episode and I was asked, I think I said AirPods too. It's definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Okay, quote or advice that has stuck with you over the years?
Oh, man, that's a really good question.
Isn't that a good one?
Yeah. There's so many that are going through my head, but I think one that comes up a lot in what we do is clarity is caring. Clarity is caring. And I find that not only applies personally, but I find that really helpful with parenting with 2 teenagers.
That's exactly where my brain went.
And being married to my wife of 20 years is that when I'm being clear, it usually shows that there's more care that's being put into it. And I don't always succeed, but I try.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, last one. One thing that you would like to communicate to our audience of church leaders.
Oh, man. So many good questions. I think at the end of the day, you guys are doing the work that God has called us to. You're doing an amazing work that is tough. Make sure to care for yourself as much as you care for others. Make sure to always hold in reverence the calling that you've been given to share his word amongst the communities that need it so desperately. We live in a time where we're under attack. Biblical ideas are under attack, and God has called you to the place that you're in a season such as this to be able to minister to people who need to hear him speak in their lives. So what an awesome opportunity that we all have to make him known. It's incredible. And I hope that the things that we do as HR Ministry Solutions help enable that to happen, because at the end of the day, we want to see the kingdom of God expand and people to know that the hope and the love of Jesus is available for them to make a choice on if they want to surrender their life over to him and live in a way that doesn't honor themselves anymore, that doesn't edge God out, but exalts him in everything that they do. So I'm so thankful for the ministers out there who do what they do. I've been one, and now I get to help come alongside and offer our expertise. And we're just very honored to be able to do that. But it's hard. Make sure to care for yourself so that you can continue. We're losing too many pastors and ministers, and it doesn't inspire a new generation when they see that. So I think if you care for yourself, you're caring for others in a way that you may not think of directly, but it's definitely an indirect effect. So yeah, that's what I would say to the audience. Love you guys out there. You're my people, the people that I get to spend a lot of time with in the trenches, in the midst of the victories and in the challenges. So
I love that. That's a good word to end on today. Justin, this has been a great conversation today. I feel like I've learned a lot.
Same.
Where can people follow you if they want to find out more about this stuff and what you do and what you offer? What's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for asking that. hrministrysolutions.com, our website, hrministrysolutions.com. That's where you can find out information of all the services that we have, whether it's a one-time service or an ongoing service. Pardon me, my cough. Or if you just need help with something. A lot of times churches feel like they're alone in these decisions. We do consulting by the half an hour, so you never have to be alone in those decisions. So we do a lot of different things to help the church get on a phone call with a member of either myself or another member of our team who can really help identify what are the needed next steps that you have. And we can go from there. But would love for your audience to take a look at what we're able to do as, we serve churches with our mission, and to be able to help them understand how important this is for the church to function and also to grow.
I love that. Thank you for sharing all of that. And of course, we'll link everything up in the show notes so that people can find out more. Overall, Justin, just thank you for your time today. Thank you for walking us through this subject and really how, to help these ministry leaders avoid these common mistakes, and just really appreciative of all your time. And Jess, thank you, of course, for being on here with me to go through this conversation today. I really appreciate you. To everyone who's listening at home today, I would just tell you, if this has been valuable to you, help us to get the word out to someone else that's serving in ministry. Maybe you've got friends that serve in your church with you, or serving in another church that you're connected to. We'd love if you could help us to get the word out about this so that we can help more and more ministry leaders everywhere. If you are listening wherever on your podcast side, definitely follow us, leave a review there. Let us know how we're doing, what you'd like to see more. If you're watching over on YouTube, definitely hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you to have us at your feed pops up when you jump on YouTube. Leave a comment. Let us know if you've ever encountered any of these mistakes, if you've ever ran into any of these problems, or if there's things that you've been able to work through. We'd love to hear your feedback. But thanks again for being with us today. And overall, we just are looking forward to being able to continue to have these conversations with you. So we will see you right back here next time on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.